The gardens of Amberley Lodge were, by universal consensus, the finest in the county. A riot of carefully orchestrated color, they spilled down a gentle south-facing slope in a series of terraces, punctuated by immaculate topiary, serene reflecting pools, and hidden arbors fragrant with night-scented stock. To stand on the flagstone terrace of the great house and look out upon this living tapestry was to understand a very particular type of English order and beauty. On this warm, golden evening in late June, that order was about to be shattered. The last notes of a Chopin nocturne, played with competent grace, faded from the open French windows of the drawing-room. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of roses drifting in, the faint tang of fine cigar smoke, and the brittle tension of a weekend gathering that had, from its outset, failed to harmonize. The group assembled for dinner at Amberley Lodge was a study in mismatched souls, brought together under one roof by the formidable will of their hostess. Lady Emmeline Vane, widow of the industrialist Sir Jasper Vane, sat at the head of the table, a slender, elegant figure in dove-grey silk. Her face, still strikingly beautiful at 58, was a mask of polite attention, but her eyes, the color of a winter sea, held a watchful, almost feverish gleam. For the past 6 months, a most peculiar and unshakable conviction had gripped her. She was convinced, utterly and completely, that her beloved gardens were trying to kill her. "A second helping, Dr. Pennington?" she asked the broad-shouldered, kind-faced man to her right. "You must keep your strength up for your early morning constitutional, though I would, of course, advise against the lower yew walk before the dew has dried. Slippery, treacherous even." Dr. Alexander Pennington, her personal physician of 10 years, gave a reassuring, rumbling laugh. "My dear Lady Emmeline, you must not let these fancies overtake you. The gardens are perfection. The most dangerous thing down by the yews is likely an ambitious earthworm." "Fancies?" The word, sharp as a splinter of ice, came from the other side of the table. Captain Hugo Lennox, Lady Emota's nephew and her heir presumptive, was a handsome man in his late 30s whose athletic build was beginning to soften into indulgence. His fingers drummed a restless tattoo on the white linen beside his empty wine glass. "Aunt Emmeline's instincts are sound. This place is a death trap if you're not careful. Overgrown, all those hidden steps, those loose stones by the folly. An accident waiting to happen." His concern, however, seemed undercut by the avaricious glance he cast around the opulent dining room. "Accidents can be prevented by a mindful custodian," intoned a dry, precise voice. Mr. Felix Whitchurch, Lady Emmeline's solicitor, adjusted his pince-nez. He was a man of angles and parchment, his demeanor suggesting he found the whole organic sprawl of the gardens vaguely offensive. "Which is why I continue to advise a more structured, legally sound approach to the estate's management. Sentiment, Lady Emmeline, is a poor guide for legacy." A soft, scoffing sound came from the young woman sitting beside the captain. Miss Violet Tempest, Lady Emmeline's companion's secretary, was all muted colors and quiet movements, but her dark eyes were intelligent and missed nothing. Sentiment built these gardens. It was Sir Jasper's great project for you, was it not, Lady Emmeline? A shadow passed over Lady Emmeline's face. It was, and he imbued every stone, every petal with his love. But now the spirit of the place has changed. It has grown resentful, jealous. The final guest, the one who seemed most out of place amidst the family drama, had remained silent throughout this exchange. Mrs. Elara Gresham, a noted horticulturalist and old-school friend of Lady Emmeline's, was a robust, earth-stained woman whose practical tweeds contrasted with the evening silks and linens. She observed her friend with a mixture of pity and profound professional frustration. "The only thing resentful in that garden, Emmeline, is the Rosa Gallica you've allowed to become infested with black spot," she said bluntly. "What it needs is sunlight, air, and a firm hand with the secateurs, not this superstitious nonsense." Lady Emmeline flinched as if struck. "You don't understand, Ilara. You work with earth. You don't feel it. I do. I feel its intentions. Last Tuesday, by the lotus pool, the paving stone tilted as I stepped on it. Deliberately. Yesterday, a branch from the ancient wisteria fell, missing my head by inches. It was not the wind. There was no wind." An uncomfortable silence descended, broken only by the clink of cutlery. The murder, when it came, was not announced by a scream, but by an absence. The dinner concluded, the party adjourned to the drawing-room for the coffee. Lady Emmeline, pleading a slight headache, announced she would take a turn on the upper terrace to clear her mind before retiring. "Aunt, surely not in the dark," Captain Lennox said, rising half-heartedly. "The terrace is lit, Hugo, and I'm perfectly safe here," she said with a brittle smile. "It is only when I descend into its heart that the garden shows its teeth." She slipped out through the French windows. The soft murmur of conversation resumed inside, stilted and strained. Dr. Pennington discussed a recent medical journal with Whitchurch. Violet Tempest pretended to study a piece of embroidery. Mrs. Gresham stared grimly into her coffee cup. Captain Lennox helped himself to a generous measure of brandy. 15 minutes passed, then 20. It was Mrs. Gresham who first grew uneasy. "She's been out too long. The evening has turned cool." Dr. Pennington set down his cup. "I'll fetch her in." He stepped out onto the terrace. The others watched through the window. As he walked to the stone balustrade, his figure outlined against the inky blue of the twilight sky. They saw him look left and right along the empty, lantern-lit terrace. "Emmeline?" His call was faint through the glass. He turned back, his face confused. Then his gaze traveled downwards, past the balustrade to the shadowy expanse of the first garden terrace below. They saw his body stiffen. A strangled sound, not quite a word, escaped him. He gripped the stonework, his knuckles white. Alarmed, Captain Lennox and Mr. Whitchurch hurried out, followed by the two women. They found Dr. Pennington pointing a trembling finger downwards. On the gravel path of the rose walk, one level below, illuminated by the soft glow of a concealed garden lamp, lay the elegant, grey-clad form of Lady Emmeline Vane. One outstretched hand seemed to clutch at a drift of fallen petals from a nearby peace rose. Her head was turned at an unnatural angle, and beside it, like some grotesque offering, lay a single, flawless, virulently yellow orchid, a cymbidium, stark and alien amongst the English roses. But it was not the orchid that drew the eye and elicited a gasp from Violet Tempest. It was the weapon, if weapon it was. Jutting from between Lady Emmeline's shoulder blades was a long, polished, and exceedingly sharp-looking pair of horticultural secateurs. Their metallic gleam in the lamplight was a brutal punctuation mark in the serene scene. Captain Lennox broke the paralysis with a roar. "Aunt Emmeline!" He scrambled for the steps leading down. "Don't touch her!" Dr. Pennington's voice was a whip-crack, the physician overriding the shocked man. "Don't touch anything. She is gone." He descended the steps with heavy tread, the others trailing behind in a horrified daze. He knelt beside the body, his fingers seeking a pulse at her neck he knew he would not find. He looked up, his face ashen. "Her neck is broken, and this—" He gestured weakly at the secateurs. This was no accident. Mr. Whitchurch, ever practical in crisis, whispered, "We must call the police immediately." But Mrs. Ilara Gresham was not looking at her dead friend. She was staring with a kind of frozen horror at the yellow orchid lying on the gravel. Her voice, when it came, was a raw whisper that carried more dread than any scream. "That orchid. It's from the new heated glass house, the one with the locked door, the only key." Her eyes traveled slowly, inevitably up to the lit windows of the house. "The only key is on the ring in Emmeline's own writing desk." In the profound silence that followed, the beautiful, sleeping gardens of Amberley Lodge seemed to watch them, no longer a place of order and beauty, but a vast, dark maze hiding a secret as poisonous as the deadliest nightshade. Lady Emmeline's fear had not been a fancy. The garden had indeed claimed its creator, but it had required a human hand to do it. The drawing-room of Amberley Lodge had undergone a sinister metamorphosis. No longer a salon for civilized after-dinner discourse, it had become a holding cell lined with books and bad watercolors. The air, still perfumed with roses and coffee, now seemed to curdle with shock, suspicion, and the raw metallic scent of fear. Inspector James Raglan of the County Constabulary was a competent, dogged man, built like a sturdy wardrobe. He had taken charge with a solemn efficiency, his sergeant a silent, note-scribbling shadow. The household staff, a cook, 2 maids, and the elderly butler, Gresham, no relation to the horticulturalist, had been interviewed and sequestered in the servants' hall. The family and guests now formed a silent, shattered tableau under the inspector's watchful eye. Dr. Pennington sat heavily in a wing-back chair, his medical bag at his feet like a loyal, useless dog. He looked every one of his 55 years, the ruddiness drained from his face. "I pronounced life extinct at approximately 10:15 p.m., he repeated for the sergeant's notebook, his voice hollow. Death was likely instantaneous, or near enough. The combined trauma of a broken cervical vertebra and the deep thoracic puncture from the implement. Captain Hugo Lennox paced before the empty fireplace, a restless panther in a smoking jacket. His initial grief had burned away, leaving a smoldering, irritable energy. "It's monstrous. In her own home, on her own terrace. What are you doing about it, Inspector? The grounds should be scoured. There could be a madman lurking in the shrubbery." "The grounds are being searched, Captain," Inspector Raglan said calmly. "But the gates were locked at 9, as is routine. The perimeter wall is high and spiked. This suggests a more contained possibility." Mr. Felix Whitchurch stood by the mantelpiece, his fingers meticulously aligning a porcelain shepherdess with its counterpart. "Contained. Precisely. We are 6 people. The staff are 4, 10 souls within a locked estate. The mathematical probabilities are therefore sharply defined." His tone was that of a man discussing an errant ledger entry. "Are you implying one of us is responsible?" cried Miss Violet Tempest. She had drawn a shawl tightly around her shoulders. Though the night was warm, her face was pale, but her gaze was clear and sharp. Who could possibly wish Lady Emmeline harm? She was eccentric lately, yes, troubled, but she was kind. "Kindness and murder are not mutually exclusive, Miss Tempest," murmured Mrs. Ilara Gresham. She alone had not taken a seat. She stood at the French window, her back to the room, staring out into the dark void where her friend lay under a police tarpaulin. Her hands, usually stained with soil, were clean and clenched at her sides. And her fear was not entirely without foundation, it seems. Inspector Raglan cleared his throat. "Let us establish the facts as we know them. After dinner, Lady Emmeline expressed a desire for air and went on to the upper terrace alone at approximately 9:40. The rest of you remained in this room. Did anyone leave the room during that time?" A stiff silence. Captain Lennox stopped pacing. "I didn't. I was by the decanters the whole time. Ask Whitchurch." The solicitor gave a single, crisp nod. "I can attest the captain was in my line of sight, pouring and consuming 2 glasses of brandy until Dr. Pennington went to look for Lady Emmeline." "And you, Mr. Whitchurch?" Raglan asked. "I was engaged in conversation with Dr. Pennington regarding the efficacy of new sulfonamide drugs. I did not leave the room." "Dr. Pennington?" The doctor passed a hand over his face. "As Mr. Whitchurch says, our conversation was uninterrupted. I left only when we grew concerned for Lady Emmeline's prolonged absence." "Miss Tempest, Mrs. Gresham." Violet Tempest's fingers plucked at her shawl. I went to the ladies' lavatory. It's just down the hall. I was gone perhaps 3 or 4 minutes. No more. And you, madam?" Raglan turned to the figure at the window. Mrs. Gresham did not turn. "I went to fetch a book from the library, a botanical reference I wished to show Emmeline, to prove a point about the black spot. I was gone for 5 minutes, perhaps 7. The library is on the other side of the hall." 2 brief absences. Neither long enough, it seemed, to descend to the Rose Walk, commit a violent murder, and return. But long enough, Poirot would have noted, for other things. "The weapon," Inspector Raglan continued, "a pair of secateurs. Are they familiar?" All eyes turned to Mrs. Gresham. She finally faced the room, her expression granite. "They are of a professional quality. Felco model number 8. They are mine. I left them, along with my basket and trowel, in the small potting shed by the glass houses this afternoon after pruning the diseased Gallica." "Were they locked away?" A faint, bitter smile touched her lips. "Inspector, a potting shed is not a bank vault. It has a simple latch. Anyone could have taken them." "And the orchid," Raglan pressed. "You identified it as being from the new heated glass house, a locked house with the only key on Lady Emmeline's personal ring." "That is correct. The Cymbidium hybrids were her particular pride. She kept them under lock and key to protect them from fluctuations in temperature and unauthorized handling. The key ring is a large brass affair. It is kept, as I said, in the upper drawer of her writing desk in the morning room." Inspector Raglan's sergeant whispered in his ear. The inspector nodded. "The key ring has been located in said drawer. The key to the orchid house is on it. The glass house door was found locked. No other key exists." Captain Lennox barked a laugh. "So what? The murderer picked the lock, stole a flower, then relocked it. Or Aunt Emmeline picked her own orchid, was stabbed with Mrs. Gresham's shears, and then somehow threw the key back to her desk before she died. It's nonsense." "It is a puzzle, Captain," Whitchurch agreed quietly. "But puzzles have solutions. The presence of the orchid is deliberate, symbolic perhaps, or a taunt." "A taunt?" Violet whispered. "From whom?" Dr. Pennington stirred. "Lady Emmeline's recent state of mind is relevant, Inspector. For the past 6 months she suffered from a pronounced delusional disorder, a persistent, unfounded fear of her gardens. She believed the very landscape was animate and malicious. I treated her for acute anxiety, but she refused more substantive intervention. She was not deluded," Mrs. Gresham stated flatly. "She was frightened, and now we know she had reason to be. Someone was deliberately trying to frighten her, tilting stones, loosening branches, a campaign of petty, cruel terror. It culminated in this." The revelation landed in the room like a stone. "You never mentioned this before, Alara," Dr. Pennington said, shocked. "She made me promise not to. She thought if she gave voice to the suspicion that it was a person, and not the spirit of the garden, it would make the danger more real, more human. And she was right." Inspector Raglan's brows drew together. This changed the landscape considerably. "So you believe someone was staging accidents to prey on her fear? To what end?" Mr. Whitchurch cleared his throat. "I may shed some light on a possible motive, Inspector. I was not only Lady Emmeline's solicitor, but also the executor of her will. Its terms are not at this moment legally privileged, as the testator is deceased." He adjusted his pince-nez. "The estate is substantial. Amberley Lodge, its contents, and the majority of the capital are left in a trust. The lifetime beneficiary of the trust's income is Miss Violet Tempest." A gasp went round the room. Violet stared, open-mouthed. I had no idea. She never said. She told me I would be provided for. But this," Whitchurch continued, mercilessly precise. "The trust is to provide Miss Tempest with a comfortable income and the right to reside at Amberley Lodge for as long as she wishes. Upon her death, the capital and the estate pass outright to Captain Hugo Lennox or his heirs." Lennox's eyes glittered. He had known this clearly. His inheritance, though assured, was now deferred by the lifetime of a young woman. There are specific bequests, Whitchurch went on. To Dr. Pennington, the sum of £20,000 in gratitude for his devoted care. To Mrs. Gresham, the horticultural library, and the right to supervise the gardens in a consultative capacity, with a modest stipend. My firm, of course, is retained to administer the trust. It was a clever, balanced will. It provided for the dependent companion, rewarded loyal service, and kept the estate technically within the family bloodline. It also gave every person in the room a very concrete motive. For Violet Tempest, a lifetime of security and a beautiful home, immediately. For Captain Lennox, to remove the obstacle standing between him and his full inheritance. For Dr. Pennington, a vast sum of money, available now, not later. For Mrs. Gresham, to gain control, at last, over the gardens she loved and believed were being mismanaged through superstition. Even for Mr. Whitchurch, the continued lucrative management of a complex trust. Inspector Raglan surveyed them all, the grieving doctor, the restless heir, the shocked companion, the bitter gardener, the fastidious lawyer. A closed circle, a locked garden, a bizarre symbolic murder. He saw a case with a tantalizingly small suspect pool, but a tangle of contradictory evidence. The locked orchid house, the misplaced key, the staged accidents, the secateurs from the open shed. Alibis that were almost, but not quite, concurrent. He felt the need for order, for a methodical mind that could see the pattern in this horticultural chaos. He thought of a man he had met once in London, a man with an egg-shaped head and an obsession with symmetry, whose methods were unorthodox, but whose results were, by all accounts, miraculous. "Sergeant," Inspector Raglan said quietly, moving to a corner of the room. "Take statements from everyone again, in detail, every movement, every sound. I want the timings pinned down to the minute." "Yes, sir." "And then?" Raglan looked at the assembled suspects, each locked in their own private world of calculation or despair. "And then," he said, "we send a telegram to London. There is a Belgian gentleman there who has, I understand, a singular talent for cultivating the truth." The arrival of Hercule Poirot at Amberley Lodge 2 days later was an event of exquisite precision, a splash of continental order upon the still choppy waters of the English tragedy. He did not so much enter the scene as orchestrate his insertion into it. Inspector Raglan, waiting at the foot of the grand staircase, watched as a gleaming bottle-green motor car purred to a halt on the gravel drive. A chauffeur, immaculate in livery, sprang out to open the rear door. From within emerged a figure of fastidious and unmistakable neatness. Hercule Poirot was exactly as Raglan remembered. A dandy of a man, just below average height, with an egg-shaped head crowned by hair so black and sleek it might have been enamel. His mustache, that magnificent mustache, was waxed to 2 perfectly symmetrical points. He wore a dark suit of a foreign cut, a pristine white shirt, and a black mourning band on his left sleeve, a touch of respect that Raglan noted with approval. Poirot's eyes, green and luminous as a cat's, took in the facade of Amberley Lodge, the manicured forecourt, the distant glimpse of terraced gardens, all in one sweeping, appraising glance. It was the look of a connoisseur surveying a complex and potentially flawed work of art. "Inspector Raglan," Poirot said, advancing with a hand extended. His accent was thick, but his diction was meticulously clear. "I am honored to be of service. You have had, I perceive, a most disagreeable affair." "Disagreeable is one word for it, Monsieur Poirot," Raglan said, shaking the surprisingly firm hand. "Baffling is another. I'm grateful you could come. The local chief constable was persuaded of the need for, external consultation." "Mais oui. When the garden itself is a suspect, one requires a weeder of unusual discernment," Poirot said, his eyes twinkling for a moment before turning grave. "The victim, she was the lady of the house?" Lady Emmeline Vane. She was. Murdered 2 nights ago on her own terrace. Stabbed with a pair of gardening shears and her neck broken. There's an exotic orchid placed by the body. A locked glass house. A history of supposed accidents. And a will that gives every soul in the house a reason to want her dead. Poirot gave a slow, deliberate nod. The classic ingredients, the closed circle, the universal motive, the theatrical mise en scène. It is promising. You have the suspects contained? They're all still here. The funeral is tomorrow, but no one's been permitted to leave. It's a pressure cooker, Monsieur Poirot. Bon. Pressure, it sometimes forces the truth to the surface, like the sap in a wounded tree. First, I must see the theater of the crime. The mind, it must reconstruct. Poirot insisted on beginning at the periphery. He examined the main gates, their locks, the height and texture of the perimeter wall, tutting at the idea of an easy ingress. He walked the gravel of the drive, his head cocked, observing the lie of the land. Only then did he allow Raglan to lead him through the house to the drawing-room French windows and out onto the upper terrace. The police had removed the body, of course, but a chalk outline on the rose-walk path below remained. A stark, ghostly diagram. The yellow orchid was gone, logged as evidence. Poirot stood at the exact spot on the upper terrace where Lady Emmeline had presumably taken her last breath of safe air. He leaned over the balustrade, his eyes missing nothing. The drop to the path below, a mere 8 feet. The placement of the garden lamp, the view of the rose walk, the steps leading down at either end of the terrace. She was found here, Raglan said, pointing to the outline. Face down, secateurs in the back, orchid by the head. The doctor says the neck break was likely from the fall, but the stabbing was a separate, deliberate act. Poirot did not reply immediately. He descended the nearest set of stone steps with a careful, mincing tread, as if afraid to disturb the very atoms of the scene. He approached the chalk outline, knelt and studied the gravel around it. He looked back up at the terrace, measuring sight lines. The light, it was from this lantern, he asked, pointing. Yes, it casts a pool right here. She was clearly visible from the terrace above. And from the house? Through the windows? Yes, Dr. Pennington saw her from the balustrade. Poirot's eyebrows raised. He saw her, or he saw a form in a grey dress? Inspector Raglan paused. He said he saw her, identified her. From 8 feet above and 15 feet away, in a patch of lamplight surrounded by dark garden, an identification made in shock and haste. It is a point to note. Poirot rose, brushing a speck of dust from his knee with a fastidious flick. Now, the famous secateur and the orchid house, if you please. The potting shed was a small, earthy-smelling stone building. Mrs. Gresham's basket, trowel, and gloves still sat on a bench, as if waiting for her. Poirot examined the simple latch. Anyone could enter, as Madame said. To take the shears was the work of a moment, but to return them, that would be more difficult after the deed. They weren't returned. They were found in the body. Précisément, Poirot said, a glint in his eye. So the murderer takes them, uses them, and leaves them. A weapon of opportunity, then, or a weapon of significance. The new orchid house was a marvel of modern horticulture. A long, low structure of steel and glass, humming faintly with the machinery of heating and humidity control. Its door was secured with a stout Chubb lock. Raglan produced the heavy brass keyring from an evidence bag. One small, distinctive key was labeled "Orchids" in neat script. He unlocked the door. A wall of warm, damp, perfumed air enveloped them. Inside was a jungle in miniature. Lush foliage dripped moisture. Strange, colorful blooms hung from hooks and burst from pots. It was a world away from the temperate English gardens outside. The cymbidium hybrids are at the far end, Raglan said, leading the way down the central aisle. The plants were magnificent, their arching sprays heavy with blooms in shades of green, white, and bronze. Poirot stopped before one plant that seemed slightly disarranged. A single stem, its end a clean, sharp cut, stood bare where a bloom should have been. "This is the parent of our theatrical orchid," Poirot murmured. He did not touch the plant, but bent very close, his eyes scanning the gravel of the bench, the leaves, the pot. He gave a small, satisfied hum. "The cut is fresh, made by a sharp blade. Not torn, a deliberate, knowledgeable action." The key was found on Lady Emmeline's ring, in her writing desk, Raglan reiterated. The door was locked. No other key. Poirot's gaze travelled around the steamy glasshouse. It is a pretty problem. To enter, one needs the key. To have the key, one must have taken it from the desk and later returned it, or he let the word hang. "We must see the desk." The morning room was sunny and feminine, dominated by a delicate escritoire of satinwood. Poirot, with Raglan's permission, examined the upper drawer. It was not locked. Inside, nestled in a velvet-lined compartment, was the brass key-ring. Poirot did not pick it up. He simply observed its position, the arrangement of the other keys for cars, cabinets, other glass houses. "It sits snug, non? To remove it without disturbing the velvet, this requires care. To return it to the exact same impression, that requires even more care and time, and presence of mind after committing a murder." He closed the drawer softly. It is a curious thing for a murderer to do. To take a key, steal a flower, lock a door, return the key. All to place a botanical calling card by the corpse. It is a flourish, an excess. It speaks of a mind that is not merely practical, but artistic. Or, he added, his voice dropping, a mind that wishes very much to appear artistic. He turned to Raglan. "Now, Inspector, you will have the goodness to introduce me to our dramatis personae. I must meet the players in this little garden drama. But first, a question. The accidents Lady Emmeline feared, the tilting stone, the falling branch. They have been examined. We found the stone by the lotus pool. It was loose in its setting. Could have been natural wear. The wisteria branch. It had a clean saw-cut mark about 3/4 of the way through, hidden on the upper side. It was made to fall. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Ah, so the campaign of terror was real. It was not a delusion. It was a deliberate, cruel, and calculated prelude to murder. That, Inspector, is the most important clue of all. It tells us that the murderer is patient. They are subtle, and they knew their victim's psychology intimately. The murder was not a sudden impulse. It was the final act of a longer play. He straightened his already straight tie. "Let us go and meet our playwright." Poirot elected to conduct his interviews in the morning room, a space of light and order he found congenial. He arranged 2 chairs at a polite distance, one for himself, facing the door, and one for the suspect, facing the window and the now ominous gardens. Inspector Raglan sat unobtrusively in a corner, a notebook open on his knee. Poirot's method was deceptively gentle. He began not with accusation, but with invitation. The first to enter was Miss Violet Tempest. She moved with a soft rustle of grey crepe, her face pale but composed. Poirot rose, bowed over her hand with old-world gallantry, and indicated the chair. "Mademoiselle Tempest, I extend my deepest sympathies. You have lost a friend and a benefactor. It is a heavy blow." Violet's eyes filled with tears. She swiftly blinked away. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. She was more than a benefactor. She was my refuge." "You have been with her how long?" 3 years. She engaged me after my father died. I had some secretarial skills and she needed companionship. It was a godsend. And in that time, you saw this change in her, the fear of the gardens. A shadow crossed her face. It began gradually, about 6 months ago. At first, it was just little remarks. "The roses are watching me today," or "the yew walk feels hungry." I thought it was poetic, a little whimsical. Then it grew darker. She would come in from a walk trembling, convinced a statue had moved or a path had shifted. Dr. Pennington prescribed sedatives, but they only dulled the edge. They didn't cure the fear. And what did you think caused this fear, mademoiselle? Violet hesitated, her fingers knotting together. I thought it was grief. Sir Jasper died 5 years ago. He built these gardens for her. They were his love letter in landscape. I wondered if being surrounded by his greatest gift without him had somehow twisted in her mind, as if the memory had become a ghost. A psychological theory, and a sensitive one, Poirot approved. And these accidents she spoke of, did you witness any? I saw the wisteria branch fall. It was a still day. It cracked and came down with a terrible rush. It missed her by feet, not inches, but it frightened her terribly. As for the stone, she showed me how it rocked. It did seem loose. And on the night of the tragedy, you left the drawing room for a few minutes. Yes, to the lavatory. Her color heightened slightly. It was just down the hall. I was gone a very short time. Did you see or hear anything? A door closing? A footstep on the gravel? Nothing. The house was quiet. Poirot leaned forward, his voice dropping to a confidential murmur. Mademoiselle, the will, you were unaware of its terms. Shock, genuine and profound, washed over her features. Completely. I knew she intended to provide for me, but a trust. The house. I never dreamed of it. It feels like a millstone now. Everyone must look at me and think. What do they think? That I killed her to get it all, she whispered, a tear finally escaping. But I didn't want it this way. I loved her. Poirot watched her cry for a moment, his head tilted. Thank you, mademoiselle. You have been most clear. Next came Captain Hugo Lennox. He strode in with a semblance of military bearing, but it was undermined by a nervous energy. He did not sit so much as perch on the edge of the chair. Monsieur Poirot, about time we had someone with a reputation on the job. This local plodding won't catch a clever fiend. You believe the murderer to be clever, Captain? Bound to be, slipping about locked gardens, stealing flowers from under lock and key. It's a conundrum. Unless the conundrum is itself a piece of misdirection, Poirot suggested mildly. Tell me, you are the heir, the ultimate heir. Did this arrangement satisfy you? Lennox's jaw tightened. It was my aunt's money to dispose of as she wished. Of course, a man likes to know his future is secure. This trust business ties things up. But Violet's a decent girl. She won't live forever. He realized the callousness of his words and flushed. I don't mean that how it sounded. The tie that binds can chafe, can it not? Poirot said. Your aunt's fear of the gardens? You took it seriously? I thought she was going batty, to be frank. But I humored her. Told her to keep to the terrace. If someone was playing tricks on her, it was a dirty, cowardly business. Could you conceive of who would do such a thing? Lennox shifted uncomfortably. She wasn't universally popular. That Gresham woman was always at loggerheads with her over the gardening. And Whitchurch thought she was fiscally irresponsible. Pennington just wanted to dope her up and collect his fee. And you, Captain, how did you and your aunt rub along? A flash of irritation. We rubbed along fine. She was family. I visited. We played backgammon. I listened to her garden fantasies. I was a good nephew. His defensiveness was palpable. On the night, you remained in the drawing room by the brandy. Yes, Whitchurch can vouch for me. Never left. But you could see the terrace from where you stood. Lennox frowned. Not directly. The angle from the decanter table is wrong. You'd have to go right up to the window. Poirot stored this correction away. Thank you, Captain. You may go. Dr. Alexander Pennington entered with a weary dignity. He looked as if he had not slept. A terrible business, Monsieur Poirot. a terrible, senseless violation of a troubled mind. You treated her troubled mind, Doctor. What was your diagnosis? A classic anxiety state, evolving into persecutory delusions. The gardens became a projective screen for her inner fears, of aging, of being alone, of her legacy. I treated her with bromide sedatives and reassurance. And the physical accidents? Pennington spread his hands, a gesture of professional bafflement. Coincidence, magnified by her paranoia. A loose stone in an old garden is not unusual. A branch, even sawn partly through, could be the work of a careless gardener years ago, weakening before it fell. But you examined the branch after the murder. I did not. The police showed me the cut. It looked fresh. I concede that is troubling. Troubling, Poirot repeated. If the accidents were staged, then her fear was not delusional, but induced. Would that change your diagnosis, Doctor? Pennington's face grew still. It would mean someone was deliberately exacerbating her condition. A form of psychological torture. It's monstrous. Monstrous, Poirot agreed. And the will, Doctor, £20,000 is a significant sum. The doctor drew himself up. I did not expect it. I was fond of Emmeline, and I performed my duty. The bequest was a generous surprise, but it is not a motive for murder. I have a comfortable practice. Comfort can always be more comfortable, can it not? One more question, Doctor. When you went to the terrace and looked over, you identified the body as Lady Emmeline immediately. How could you be so sure from that height and distance in the dark? Pennington blinked. The grey silk dress, the silver in her hair caught the light. Who else could it have been? That is my question, Poirot said pleasantly. Thank you, Doctor. Mrs. Ilara Gresham entered like a force of nature, her tweeds seeming to bring the chill of the outdoors with her. She ignored the proffered chair and stood, feet planted, before Poirot. You're the detective. Well, have you found out who was terrorizing her? I am in the process of weeding the flower bed of information, madame. It is meticulous work. You were, perhaps, closest to Lady Emmeline in the old days. We were at school together. She was the beauty, the social butterfly. I was the one with dirt under my nails. She married money and position. I married my work. We remained friends of a sort. She'd have me down to advise on the gardens. Or rather, she'd have me down to ignore my advice while pretending to listen. And her fear. It began after that fool Pennington put her on stronger sedatives. But I knew it wasn't just in her head. I found the sore cut on the wisteria myself, 2 days after the branch fell. I told her. That's when she made me promise not to tell the others. She suspected a person. She said it would make it official. She was clinging to the idea of a spectral enemy because a human one was too terrible to face. And the secateurs, they were definitely yours? Yes. Good Swiss steel. I've had them for years. Anyone could have taken them. And the orchid? The locked house? A muscle twitched in her jaw. That's the clever part, isn't it? The impossible flourish. To get that orchid, you needed her key. To have her key, you'd have to take it from her desk or take it from her person. Either way, it points back to the house. To one of us. You were absent from the drawing room, fetching a book. I was. The library. No one saw me. Her gaze was defiant, challenging him to disbelieve her. Did you find your book? I did. It's still on the library table. Diseases of the Rosaceae. Poirot nodded slowly. A practical text. Not, perhaps, one to comfort a frightened friend. Comfort wasn't what she needed, Mrs. Gresham said sharply. She needed truth. She needed protecting, and I failed her. For the first time, her iron composure cracked, revealing a raw grief beneath. She turned and left without another word. Finally, Mr. Felix Whitchurch presented himself, precise as a folded document. He sat back straight and placed his hands on his knees. A sad and sordid affair, Monsieur Poirot. I trust you can bring it to a swift and logical conclusion. I endeavor always for logic, monsieur. You of all people appreciate the importance of order. The will, it is a model of order. It is a legally sound instrument designed to balance multiple interests and ensure the estate's preservation. And your firm's continued involvement in that preservation is stipulated? It is. A standard clause. Our fees are not contingent on the outcome, if that is your implication. The implication is merely that you have a professional stake in the estate's orderly administration. Disorder, such as murder, is bad for business. Whitchurch permitted himself a thin smile. Murder is generally considered bad for business, yes, but it does not in this case disrupt the legal framework. The trust proceeds. My role continues. On the night you were conversing with Dr. Pennington, you are certain neither of you left? I am certain. Our discussion was technical and absorbing. We were side by side on the Chesterfield. To leave, one would have had to excuse oneself. Neither did. And you saw Captain Lennox at the decanters? I did. He was a fixture there. Poirot tented his fingers. A final question, Mr. Whitchurch, of a philosophical nature. In your experience, does murder often involve such theatrical touches? A rare orchid, a staged fall? Whitchurch considered. It is atypical. It suggests either a deranged mind or a very calculating one attempting to simulate derangement. In legal terms, it could be considered window dressing, an attempt to distract from a simpler, uglier truth. A simpler truth? Poirot echoed, his eyes glowing. Merci, monsieur. You have been most illuminating. When Whitchurch had left, Inspector Raglan let out a long breath. Well, a lot of words, but where does it get us? They all have motives. Their alibis are weak but not breakable. The orchid is still a locked room mystery within a locked garden mystery. Poirot was staring out at the terrace, a faint smile on his lips. We have made progress, my friend. We have seen the characters, we have heard their stories, and already the careful pattern begins to show a looseness in the weave. What pattern? It's a muddle. Ah, but it is a particular muddle. It is a muddle with a yellow orchid at its center, placed by a person who wished to be seen as clever, as artistic, as someone who could defy locks. But perhaps, Inspector, the greatest defiance of a lock is not to open it at all, but to make everyone believe you did. He turned, his expression suddenly brisk. Now, we must examine the dressing gown of Lady Emmeline. And then, I wish to walk the exact route she took from the dining room to the terrace, every step. It is in the psychology of the steps that we may find the footprint of the murderer. The following day brought the grim formality of Lady Emmeline's funeral. The small party from Amberley Lodge, accompanied by a few local dignitaries, returned from the churchyard under a sky of oppressive grey. The atmosphere in the house was now one of suspended animation, grief laced with a sharp, watchful anxiety. The presence of Poirot, that small, immaculate figure observing everything with his cat-like eyes, was a constant, unsettling reminder that the business of death was far from over. It was in the late afternoon that Inspector Raglan, his face a mixture of excitement and satisfaction, requested a private audience with Poirot in the library. He closed the door firmly. "I think we've got it, Monsieur Poirot," he said, keeping his voice low. "A breakthrough. The sort of tangible clue your methods might overlook, but it's damning." Poirot, who had been examining the botanical book Mrs. Gresham had left on the table, set it down with care. "I am all attention, Inspector. A clue is a clue, whether it is tangible or a mere whisper in the mind. It's more than a whisper. It's a fibre, a literal fibre." Raglan produced a small, clear evidence envelope. Inside was a single, short strand of wool, a distinctive deep bottle green in colour. This was found caught on a rough edge of the stone balustrade on the upper terrace, the exact spot where someone might have leaned over heavily or scrambled over in a hurry. Poirot took the envelope and held it up to the light. "The colour is distinctive. It is not from Lady Emmeline's grey silk, certainement. No. And we've checked the wardrobes. Captain Lennox has a tweed jacket in this exact shade of green. Wore it the day before the murder, according to the maid who brushes his clothes. He claims he hasn't worn it since. A claim easily made and difficult to disprove, Poirot murmured. There's more, Raglan pressed on, his confidence building. The timing. We've tightened the alibis. Miss Tempest and Mrs. Gresham were both absent for short periods, but the maid passed the library door while Mrs. Gresham was inside. She heard her moving about, and the downstairs lavatory flushed while Miss Tempest was in there. Their absences seemed genuine and brief. And the men. Dr. Pennington and Mr. Whitchurch alibi each other solidly. But Captain Lennox, his alibi depends solely on Whitchurch seeing him by the decanters. Whitchurch admits he wasn't watching him every second. Lennox could have slipped out the other French window, the one in the dining room which connects to the same terrace, committed the deed, and slipped back in. A matter of 2-3 minutes if he was quick and knew the terrain. The terrain he grew up visiting, Poirot mused. He would know it intimately. And the motive? The most direct. He inherits everything, but only after Miss Tempest's death. Perhaps he didn't want to wait. Or perhaps he thought the trust could be broken, challenged if the will was executed immediately after her death, with him as the clear heir. He's in debt, Monsieur Poirot. My men made discreet inquiries in London. Gambling debts, substantial. That 20,000 left to Pennington would have been a lifesaver for him, but it's not his. The full estate, however. Poirot nodded slowly, considering the tapestry Raglan was weaving. And the green fibre, you have confronted him? Not yet. I wanted your opinion first. My opinion is that you have the beginnings of a case a prosecuting counsel would relish. The motive, the opportunity, the physical evidence. It is neat. It is convenient. Raglan caught the inflection. You think it's too neat? I think, Poirot said, placing the evidence envelope gently on the desk, that the murderer who staged the falling branch and the tilting stone, a patient, subtle planner, would be unlikely to catch his distinctive clothing on a balustrade in the panic of the moment. And the orchid, Inspector. Where does the impossible orchid fit into Captain Lennox's impatient, debt-driven scheme? Raglan frowned. A red herring, a bit of melodrama he threw in to confuse things. He had access to the house. He could have stolen the key earlier, taken the flower, and planned to use it. Then why return the key to the desk? After murdering his aunt, would his first thought be to meticulously return a key to a velvet-lined drawer? Would a man in a panic, leaving a fibre behind, have such presence of mind? Poirot shook his head. No, the psychology is wrong. The Lennox you describe is impulsive, greedy. The crime as committed is calculating, theatrical, cold. They are not the same man. Psychology. Raglan could not keep the frustration from his voice. You can't take psychology to the assizes. A fibre and a debt ledger you can. And you may have to, mon ami, Poirot said not unkindly. But if you do, you will be trying the wrong man. The fibre, it is a little gift. A little present left for the diligent policeman who looks for tangible clues. You think it was planted? I think it is a possibility that must agitate the little grey cells. Come, let us pay a visit to Captain Lennox. Let us see how he responds to the tightening net. They found Hugo Lennox in the billiard room, practicing shots with a violent intensity that sent the balls cracking against the cushions. He straightened as they entered, his face wary. Inspector, Monsieur Poirot, have you news? We have a question, Captain, Raglan said, adopting a formal tone. Regarding a jacket of yours, a bottle-green tweed. Lennox went very still. The cue rested on the floor. What about it? When did you last wear it? I told your man, the day before the murder. For a walk. It got muddy at the hem, so I gave it to the maid to brush. And it hasn't been worn since? No, it's hanging in my wardrobe. You're certain you didn't wear it on the night of the murder? Perhaps you slipped it on to go outside. The evening was cool. A sheen of perspiration appeared on Lennox's brow. Absolutely not. I was in my dinner jacket all evening. Ask anyone. We found a fiber from that jacket, Captain, Raglan said, his voice hardening. On the terrace balustrade, at the scene of the crime. The color drained from Lennox's face. For a moment, he looked utterly stricken, like a boy caught in a terrible lie. Then a flush of anger replaced the fear. That's impossible. It's a lie. Or someone's trying to frame me. Who would frame you, Captain? Poirot asked softly. How should I know? Someone who wants the money and wants me out of the way. Tempest, that simpering little secretary with her lifetime trust, or that dried-up lawyer who wants to keep his fingers in the pie, or the doctor covering up for his malpractice, or the Gresham hag who wanted control of the gardens. His voice rose, accusations flying wildly. You were in debt, Captain, Raglan pressed. Heavily. The full inheritance would solve all your problems. The trust was an inconvenience, a delay. Lennox slammed the butt of the cue on the floor. So what if I was in debt? That doesn't make me a killer. Yes, I wanted the money. Who wouldn't? But I didn't kill her for it. You have to believe me. His plea ended in a near shout, his eyes darting between the two men, seeing only condemnation. Raglan looked at Poirot, his expression saying, See? The guilty reaction. Poirot, however, was watching Lennox with a curious pity. The captain's panic was too total, too undirected. It was the panic of a man caught in a trap, not the controlled defiance of a calculating murderer faced with a single clue. Captain Lennox, Poirot said, his voice cutting through the man's agitation. The orchid, the yellow orchid from the locked house. What is your opinion of it? The question, so incongruous, momentarily derailed Lennox. The orchid. What about it? It's a bloody stupid flower. Theatrical nonsense. You have no idea how it came to be by your aunt's body? None, unless she was carrying it, which is ridiculous. Did you ever see your aunt's key ring, the one with the orchid house key? Of course I've seen it. A great brass monstrosity. She was always jangling it. Could you have taken it without her knowing to get the flower? If I'd taken it, I wouldn't have bothered with the flower. I'd have taken the cash from her damned escritoire. The words were out before he could stop them, a burst of reckless honesty that was more telling than any lie. He clapped a hand over his mouth, his eyes wide with horror at his own admission. Inspector Raglan pounced. So you knew she kept cash in the desk? Lennox deflated, all the fight leaving him. He slumped against the billiard table. £100 or so, for household incidentals. I'd seen it there, but I didn't take it. I didn't take the key, and I didn't kill her. Poirot gave a slight nod to Raglan and turned toward the door. In the hallway, out of earshot, Raglan whispered fiercely, He as good as confessed to the motive, and the fiber places him at the scene. It's enough to hold him, enough to charge him, likely. It is enough, yes, Poirot agreed, his face troubled. But it is not correct. The key, Inspector. The key is still the problem. Lennox, in his panic and his greed, thinks of the cash in the desk, not the key. The murderer thought first of the key and of the orchid. Their minds work on different planes. Lennox is a bull. This crime was executed by a watchful, delicate spider. No, we must look further. Look further? With a suspect who has motive, opportunity, and evidence against him? Precisement. Because when the evidence is too perfect, when it points so clearly to the obvious person, one must ask, cui bono? Who benefits from Captain Lennox being arrested? Not just the true murderer's freedom, but perhaps something else. Poirot's eyes traveled up the staircase, towards the private rooms of the house. I must think, and I must examine Lady Emmeline's dressing gown as I intended. The answer, I believe, lies not in what was added to the scene, the orchid, the fiber, but in what was taken away. The arrest of Captain Hugo Lennox was a seismic event within the fragile ecosystem of Amberley Lodge. Inspector Raglan, armed with the fibre, the debt, and the shattered alibi, took him into custody the following morning. Lennox's protests faded into a sullen, despairing silence as he was led to a police car. The remaining inhabitants watched from various windows, a tableau of relief, shock, and unreadable calculation. To the outside world, and to Inspector Raglan's substantial satisfaction, the case was solved. The newspapers, briefed by a cautious constabulary, ran headlines like "Garden Heir arrested in aristocratic murder" and "Secateurs slashing solved." Order, of a brutal sort, had been restored. Hercule Poirot did not depart. He remained, a quiet, impeccably dressed ghost in the corridors, his continued presence a silent rebuke to the notion of a tidy conclusion. He had spent a fruitful hour in Lady Emmeline's bedroom, examining her wardrobe with the care of a curator. The grey silk evening dress she had worn lay over a chair, awaiting the attention of a maid. But it was her dressing gowns that interested Poirot, a collection of luxurious silks and wools, each hung with precision. He had asked the maid a few gentle questions, nodded, and departed the room with a look of profound contemplation. Now he began his psychological game. He did not call another formal interview. Instead, he engineered casual, pointed encounters. He found Mrs. Alara Gresham in the rose garden, viciously deadheading the peace roses near where the body had lain. She did not look up as he approached. "The roses, they bloom still, even for tragedy," Poirot observed. "They're plants. They don't care." She snipped a spent bloom with more force than necessary. "Unlike people who care too much, perhaps. You're not relieved, Madame Gresham, that the captain is arrested." She paused. Her secateurs, a different pair, Poirot noted, hovering in midair. Relieved? That a blundering fool like Hugo killed her? No, it makes her death seem cheap, a sordid grab for cash. Emmeline deserved a better villain. A better villain? Poirot's eyebrows arched. One more intelligent, more subtle, one who understood the symbolic power of a rare orchid. She finally turned to look at him, her eyes fierce. "Exactly. If you're going to be murdered by your garden, it should be by someone who understands it, not by a oaf who only sees the land as so many pounds per acre. You admired her, even in her fear. I loved her, even when she was maddening, and someone terrorized her. That's what I can't forgive. The months of fear before the final act. Hugo hasn't the patience for that. He'd have just pushed her down the stairs one night and been done with it." "A profound insight," Poirot said softly. "You see the method. It is the method that reveals the mind. Thank you, madame." His next quarry was in the library. Mr. Felix Whitchurch was updating estate papers, his pen scratching across parchment with metallic precision. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot, I trust you are satisfied with the resolution. The law, though sometimes slow, moves with certainty." "The law has moved, yes, but certainty, that is a more elusive quality. Tell me, Mr. Whitchurch, as a man of logic, does the solved crime satisfy your sense of order?" Whitchurch set down his pen. "It satisfies the legal requirements. Motive, opportunity, evidence. The narrative is coherent." "But is it elegant?" Poirot pressed. "You spoke of window dressing. The orchid. Does that piece of dressing fit the window of Captain Lennox's character?" A flicker of something, annoyance, crossed the solicitor's face. "It is an anomaly. But criminals are not always consistent. He may have intended it as a bizarre tribute or to suggest the suicide of a disturbed mind. A disturbed mind, like the one he was supposedly terrorizing for months with staged accidents? That requires a duality of purpose, does it not? To frighten with subtlety, then to kill with a clumsy, traceable fibre. It is not a coherent psychological portrait. Whitchurch steepled his fingers. "Psychology is not my domain, Monsieur Poirot. My domain is fact. The fibre is a fact. The debt is a fact." "And the key?" Poirot asked innocently. "The The key that returned itself to the desk? Is that a fact or a conjuring trick? An unexplained fact. Not all facts in a case are neatly explained. The law deals in probabilities. And the probability that the true murderer remains here, enjoying the spectacle of an innocent man's arrest. Is that not also a fact to consider? Poirot did not wait for an answer. He gave a little bow and left the solicitor staring after him, his composed mask slightly cracked. Poirot encountered Dr. Pennington on the terrace, staring down at the now empty Rose Walk. A sad vista, Doctor. The scene of your friend's last moment. Pennington started. Oh, Monsieur Poirot. Yes, it is. I keep seeing her there. Every time I look. The mind's eye can be cruel. You identified her quickly that night. By her dress, her hair. As I said. But you are a medical man. You know identification is more than silhouette. It is the set of the shoulders, the curve of the neck. Did you see her face? Pennington frowned, uneasy. It was turned away, towards the roses. So you identified a grey dress and silver hair in a patch of light. Could it have been, for one terrible moment, someone else? Someone placed there for you to find? The doctor's face went slack with a new kind of horror. What are you suggesting? That I was meant to find her? That someone wanted me to be the one? You are the natural choice. The physician, the first point of authority. Your pronouncement of death set the official clock ticking, a very important role in the play. Poirot watched him closely. Tell me, Doctor, in your treatment of Lady Emmeline's anxiety, did you ever prescribe anything stronger than bromide? Anything that might make her more suggestible, more prone to confusion? Pennington drew himself up, a flush of professional indignation on his cheeks. Certainly not. I am an ethical practitioner. I treated her with standard sedatives, to imply otherwise. I imply nothing. I merely explore the garden of possibilities. Some plants are medicinal, some are poisonous. The difference is often in the dose and the intent. Poirot smiled politely and moved on, leaving the doctor shaken. Finally, he sought out Miss Violet Tempest. He found her not at her embroidery, but in the morning room, staring at the escritoire as if it were a venomous creature. It is a heavy responsibility, mademoiselle. This desk, this house. She turned, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. I don't want it, not like this. Everyone thinks I must be glad Hugo is gone, that my position is secure. But it feels like a prison bought with blood. A poignant image. And an accurate one, perhaps. The murderer has constructed a prison of suspicion for everyone. For Captain Lennox, a prison of bars. For you, a gilded cage of inheritance. For the others, the prison of this house, waiting for the axe to fall again. Again? She whispered. Oh, yes. For the true murderer is not finished. Captain Lennox is a piece removed from the board, but the game is not over. The central mystery, the orchid, remains unplayed, and the player who placed it will not rest while that move is unappreciated. He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. You are observant, mademoiselle. You see the small things. On the night of the murder, when you left the drawing room, are you absolutely certain you heard nothing? Not a rustle of silk? Not the very faint click of a door closing? Violet's brow furrowed in intense concentration, drawn into Poirot's web of suggestion. I thought I heard the front door of the house shut, very softly. But that was just as I was entering the lavatory. I assumed it was Gresham, the butler, checking the lock. The front door? Not the terrace door? No, the front door. It has a distinctive sound. A deep thud. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Merci, mademoiselle. That is most helpful. He patted her hand paternally. Do not lose heart. The garden may yet yield its true poison. Over the next 24 hours, Poirot became a master of unsettling innuendo. He would remark to Mrs. Gresham on the clarity of the saw cut on the wisteria branch, suggesting a gardener's knowledgeable hand. He would ask Mr. Whitchurch hypothetically about the legalities of a trust if the principal beneficiary were declared mentally incompetent before the testator's death. He mentioned to Dr. Pennington the interesting pharmacological properties of certain common garden plants that could mimic anxiety symptoms. He was applying pressure not to break alibis, but to unsettle minds. He was watching for the crack in the composure, the nervous glance, the overly emphatic denial. And he saw it. It was during a tense, silent dinner on the second night after Lennox's arrest. Poirot, as an official guest, presided at the head of the table with a serene authority. The conversation was stilted, revolving around the weather. Suddenly, Poirot said, as if musing aloud, "It is a curious thing, the psychology of the key. We focus so on how it was taken and returned, but we neglect the simpler question, was it needed at all?" 4 pairs of eyes snapped to him. Mrs. Gresham's fork clattered slightly on her plate. "What do you mean?" asked Dr. Pennington. "I mean," said Poirot, savouring a piece of roast potato with theatrical slowness, "that if one wished to place a yellow orchid from a locked house by a body, and one did not wish to be seen with the key, there is an alternative. One could have taken the orchid earlier, perhaps days earlier, and kept it fresh in water, waiting for the right moment." The silence around the table was absolute, charged with a new and terrible understanding. "But that would mean," Violet began. "It would mean," Poirot finished for her, "that the theft of the orchid and the murder were not connected by a frantic, locked-room puzzle on the night. They were separate acts. The orchid was in reserve, a prop. This changes the timing, the pressure, the very nature of the crime. It was not a chaotic act with a magical flourish. It was a planned performance with all props prepared in advance." He looked around the table, meeting each gaze. Mr. Whitchurch had gone very pale. Dr. Pennington was frozen, his napkin halfway to his lips. Mrs. Gresham stared at her plate, her jaw clenched. Only Violet looked confused, working through the logic. "The murderer," Poirot said softly, "is therefore someone who had the foresight to pick the flower ahead of time, someone who had the knowledge to keep it fresh, and someone who had the cold-bloodedness to carry it with them, perhaps in a pocket, on the night they intended to kill, ready to lay it down as their signature." He took a sip of wine. "That, mes amis, is a very different kind of killer than Captain Lennox. That is the killer who has been sitting amongst you all along." He had not accused anyone. He had merely laid out a new, more horrifying blueprint for the crime. But the effect was electric. The psychological game had reached its climax. The next move, Poirot knew, would have to be made by the murderer. A trapped, meticulous mind, faced with the unraveling of its beautiful, impossible puzzle, would be forced to act. The night after Poirot's dinner-table revelation was one of sleepless tension at Amberley Lodge. His words had acted as a psychic poison, seeping into the cracks of the house's fragile calm. Each suspect retired to their room, but Poirot doubted any truly slept. They were each, he imagined, turning over the new blueprint in their minds, measuring their own position against its chilling geometry. Poirot himself kept vigil in his room, his ears attuned to the nocturnal sounds of the old house, the sigh of timbers, the distant chime of a clock, the scurrying of a mouse behind the wainscot. He was waiting. The psychological pressure had been applied. He expected a reaction. It came not with a scream, but with a startling, mundane sound just after 2 a.m, the distinct, rolling thud of a heavy object falling, followed by a sharp, muffled cry. Poirot was out of his bed and into the corridor in moments, a surprisingly agile figure in a silk dressing gown. He carried a small electric torch. Doors opened along the hallway. Dr. Pennington emerged, bleary-eyed. Violet Tempest peered out, a shawl over her nightdress, her face pale with fear. "What was that?" Pennington asked, his voice thick with sleep and alarm. "It came from below," Poirot stated. "The main stairway, I think." They hurried down, Poirot leading with his torch beam cutting the darkness. At the foot of the grand staircase, they found the source of the noise. Mr. Felix Whitchurch lay sprawled on the polished parquet of the entrance hall. A heavy bronze Assyrian statue, a winged bull that usually stood on a plinth at the turn of the stairs, lay on its side beside him, one sharp wingtip perilously close to his temple. Whitchurch was groaning, clutching his shoulder, his pince-nez askew and one lens cracked. "Good God!" Dr. Pennington exclaimed, rushing forward and kneeling. "Whitchurch, can you hear me?" "My shoulder. I think it's dislocated," Whitchurch gasped through gritted teeth. "The damned thing, it fell." Poirot did not immediately tend to the injured man. His torch beam traveled slowly up the staircase, marking the empty plinth on the half-landing. He then examined the statue, the floor around it, and finally, Whitchurch's feet. The solicitor was wearing leather bedroom slippers. "You were coming downstairs, Monsieur Whitchurch?" "At this hour. I couldn't sleep," Whitchurch hissed as Pennington probed his shoulder. "I thought a brandy might help. I was on the landing when it just toppled forward. I threw myself back, but it caught my shoulder." Poirot ascended the stairs to the half-landing. The plinth was substantial, its top flat and dusty. He could see the clean rectangular impression where the statue's base had stood. There were no signs of a struggle, no scuff marks. He leaned over the balustrade and looked down at the precise spot where Whitchurch had fallen. "A most unfortunate accident," Poirot called down, his voice echoing slightly in the hall. "Accident?" Whitchurch managed, allowing Pennington to help him sit up. "It was no accident. It was pushed. Someone tried to kill me." This declaration hung in the dark air. Violet, who had descended part way, drew her shawl tighter. Dr. Pennington looked up, his face grave. "Why would anyone try to kill you, Mr. Whitchurch?" Poirot asked, descending the stairs with measured steps. "Because I know something." Whitchurch's usual composure was shattered by pain and terror. His words tumbled out. "After what you said at dinner, Poirot, about the orchid being picked ahead of time, I've been thinking. There's a way it could have been done. A way the key didn't need to be taken from the desk at all on the night." "Indeed?" Poirot's tone was neutral, but his eyes were like gimlets in the torchlight. "The duplicate," Whitchurch spat. "Sir Jasper had a duplicate key made for the orchid house years ago. He gave it to the head gardener at the time, a man named Cooper, so he could see to the heating stokes without bothering Emmeline. Cooper left, but the key was never returned. It was assumed lost. But what if it wasn't lost? What if someone here has it?" The revelation landed with the force of the fallen statue. It demolished the elegant impossibility of the locked glass house. The orchid could have been picked at any time with a key no one knew existed. "Why did you not mention this before?" Dr. Pennington asked, shocked. "It slipped my mind, a trivial detail from years ago. It only came back to me tonight, when I was thinking about Poirot's theory. And then, this." He gestured weakly at the statue. "So you believe," Poirot said softly, "that someone overheard your thoughts, or feared you would remember this fact, and attempted to silence you by staging another accident. A falling object, just like the wisteria branch?" "Yes, they're trying to kill me because I'm getting too close." Poirot nodded slowly. "A plausible narrative. Doctor, please see to Mr. Whitchurch's shoulder. Mademoiselle Violet, perhaps some brandy for the shock. I will examine the scene more closely." As Pennington helped the groaning solicitor towards the drawing room and Violet went to fetch decanters, Poirot remained in the hall. He did not look again at the statue or the stairs. Instead, he walked to the front door. He tested the heavy bolt. It was shot home, secure. He then moved to the service door leading to the kitchens, also locked. He returned to the foot of the stairs and shone his torch on the floor around the fallen statue. Then, with a small sigh, he ascended to the first-floor hallway and walked quietly to the door of Mr. Whitchurch's room. It was slightly ajar. Poirot pushed it open with a gloved fingertip. The room was in perfect order, the bed neatly made, a briefcase open on a desk showing tidy papers. Poirot's torch beam swept the room. It lingered on the nightstand. There was a book, a glass of water, and a small rectangular impression in the thin layer of dust on the polished surface. An impression that matched the size and shape of a heavy bronze Assyrian statue. A faint, cold smile touched Poirot's lips. He retreated as silently as he had come. Downstairs, Whitchurch was settled in an armchair, his shoulder roughly immobilized by Dr. Pennington with a torn linen napkin. He sipped brandy, his hand trembling. Mrs. Gresham and the butler had been roused by the commotion and now stood in the doorway, looking bewildered. "A most disturbing event," Poirot announced, entering the drawing-room. "Mr. Whitchurch believes it was an attempt on his life, prompted by his recollection of a duplicate Orchid House key." "A duplicate?" Mrs. Gresham's voice was sharp. "Jasper never told me that. It appears to have been a secret between him and the gardener Cooper. Then anyone could have it. Or," Poirot said, his gaze resting on Whitchurch, "someone could be using the idea of it to explain away the impossible orchid, now that my theory has made pre-planning the likely solution." Whitchurch stiffened. "Are you suggesting I'm lying?" "I am suggesting the human mind is a fascinating instrument. It can forget, and it can remember, at the most convenient times." Poirot paused. "There is, however, a more immediate question. If this was an attempt on your life, Monsieur Whitchurch, how did your assailant leave the scene? The front and service doors are bolted from the inside. The French windows in this room are locked. No one passed myself, Dr. Pennington, or Mademoiselle Violet in the upstairs corridor. So where did they go?" Silence. Everyone looked around, as if the walls might conceal a secret panel. "They must have gone upstairs," Violet whispered. "Then they would be trapped on the upper floor with us," Poirot said. "A reckless move for a meticulous killer." He walked over to the Assyrian statue, which had been righted and placed by the door. "This object is very heavy. To topple it from the plinth with enough force to strike a man on the landing below would require a significant push. Or," he turned his luminous eyes on Whitchurch, "it could be achieved by a rope or a wire from a distance. But such an apparatus would need to be retrieved afterward, and there is no sign of it." "What are you saying, Poirot?" Dr. Pennington asked, confusion etched on his face. "I'm saying that the physics of the event are as interesting as the psychology." Poirot clasped his hands behind his back. "Mr. Whitchurch, you stated the statue toppled forward as you were on the landing. Yet the statue fell in a straight drop, not a forward pitch. Its base is flat. It does not overhang the plinth. For it to fall, it would need to be lifted and pushed, or the plinth itself would need to be struck with considerable force." Whitchurch's eyes darted away. "I must have been mistaken in the shock. It happened so fast. Of course, shock is a powerful disorienter. It can make a man forget, for instance, that he has dust on the knees of his pajamas from kneeling on a dusty floor, or that the placement of a heavy object in one's own bedroom might leave a telltale impression on the nightstand." The drawing-room froze, all eyes locked on Whitchurch. His face, already pale, turned a sickly grey. I don't know what you mean," he stammered. "I mean," Poirot said, his voice now as sharp and precise as a scalpel, "that there was no assailant. You brought the statue downstairs from your own room, hence the dust on your knees from lifting it. You placed it on the half-landing plinth, perhaps only moments before you pretended to descend. You then created the noise, throwing something else heavy or striking the banister, and cried out. You dislocated your own shoulder, a painful but calculated act to lend verisimilitude by throwing yourself against the newel post or the stair edge with the statue positioned to fall beside you. You then concocted the story of the duplicate key to explain your brush with death and to redirect the investigation back to the impossibility of the orchid, which your new information conveniently solves. Whitchurch was trembling violently now, not from pain, but from exposure. That's insane. Why would I do such a thing? For 2 reasons, I think, Poirot said, advancing a step. First, to reinforce your status as a target, thus eliminating yourself from suspicion in the original murder. A man who is almost killed is not the killer, n'est-ce pas? Second, and more importantly, to introduce the duplicate key into the narrative, because you, Mr. Whitchurch, are in possession of that key. You have had it since Cooper left. It was you who picked the yellow orchid days in advance. It was you who staged the accidents to drive Lady Emmeline deeper into fearful dependency. And it was you who murdered her, using the pre-planned orchid as your final, taunting signature. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the ragged sound of Whitchurch's breathing. The major reveal was not a second crime, but the unmasking of the first crime's method and the desperate, clumsy theater of the man who committed it. The game had changed entirely. The psychological pressure had not forced a new murder, but a fatal, revealing mistake. The drawing room felt like a court in session, with Poirot as both prosecutor and judge. Whitchurch, trapped in his armchair, shoulder throbbing, faced the incredulous and horrified stares of the others. His mask of fastidious order had crumbled, revealing the desperate man beneath. This is slander," he choked out, but the defiance was hollow, a reflex against the tide of logic. "It is deduction," Poirot corrected gently, "and it rests on a foundation of small, overlooked facts. The hidden clue was not a single object, but an absence noted by a maid and confirmed by my own inspection of Lady Emmeline's wardrobe." He paused, ensuring he had everyone's attention. Dr. Pennington was leaning forward, medical fascination overtaking shock. Mrs. Gresham's eyes burned with a furious understanding. Violet looked bewildered but utterly absorbed. "When I examined the victim's room," Poirot continued, "I asked the maid about Lady Emmeline's habits. She was a creature of routine, of order, almost one might say, of a Poirot-like fastidiousness." He allowed himself a small smile. Each evening, after dressing for dinner, she would hang her day clothes with care, and she always wore a particular item when taking the air in the evening, even on the terrace, a light cashmere shawl, cream in color. The maid was adamant. "She felt the chill from the garden, sir," she told me. "It was her habit for years." He let the significance sink in. And yet, Poirot's voice dropped to a dramatic whisper. "When her body was found on the rose walk, she was wearing only her grey silk dinner dress, no shawl. It was not on the terrace. It was not in her room. It has not been found." "She might have forgotten it that night," Dr. Pennington offered weakly. "She might. But consider her state of mind. She was afraid of the gardens. The terrace was her safe zone. Would she venture out, even there, without the familiar armor of her shawl against the chill, both real and imagined? It is possible, but unlikely. It is a discordant note." Poirot turned his gaze to Whitchurch. "But if we consider your plan, Monsieur Whitchurch, the missing shawl becomes a crucial piece of the mechanism. You knew her habits. You knew she would likely be wearing it, and you needed her not to be." "Why on earth would I care about a shawl?" Whitchurch snapped, but a tic had begun under his left eye. "Because of identification, monsieur. You needed the body on the rose walk to be instantly identified as Lady Emmeline from the terrace above. By the doctor, a grey dress and silver hair in the lamplight. But what if the doctor had seen a cream-colored shawl? What if that shawl had obscured the line of the shoulders, the drape of the dress? The silhouette might not have been so instantly recognizable. He might have hesitated, descended to investigate more closely before raising the alarm. And closer investigation at that early stage might have been inconvenient for you." "What are you implying?" Mrs. Gresham's voice was a harsh whisper. "I am implying," Poirot said, "that the body Dr. Pennington saw from the terrace was not Lady Emmeline Vane." Not yet. A collective intake of breath sucked the air from the room. It was a tableau, Poirot declared. A carefully arranged scene using the only other person in the house of a similar height and build to Lady Emmeline, who also owned a grey evening dress. A person whose hair, in the lamplight, could look silver. A person who could be compelled or tricked into lying still on the gravel for a few critical minutes. All eyes swung to Violet Tempest. She stared back, uncomprehending for a second. Then her hand flew to her mouth. Me? You think it was me? Your grey crepe dress, mademoiselle. It is very similar in shade to Lady Emmeline's silk. From a distance, in a pool of artificial light, the difference would be invisible. And your hair, while dark, has a few premature strands of grey, a fact you lamented to the maid just last week. With your face turned away towards the roses, with the light catching those strands. Yes, it could suffice for a fleeting, shocked identification from above. Violet looked as if she might faint. But I was in the house. I went to the lavatory. Did you? Or did you, upon leaving the drawing-room, encounter Mr. Whitchurch in the hall? Did he perhaps tell you he had just found Lady Emmeline feeling faint on the lower terrace? That she needed your shawl, your cream shawl, for warmth? That you should take it to her and perhaps help her inside? He might have handed you your own shawl, which he had fetched from your room. You, anxious to help, rush out through the dining-room French doors, down to the rose walk. You see a figure in grey, face down. You bend over, her, your own shawl in your hands. And then Poirot made a swift, sharp gesture with his hand. A blow to the back of the neck, not to kill, but to render unconscious, from behind, by someone who followed you. You are draped with your own shawl to keep you warm and to obscure your dress. The murderer then ascends to the drawing-room, waits for the appropriate concern to arise, and guides the doctor to the terrace to make the identification. In the commotion that follows, the shouts, the rush downstairs, you, Mademoiselle Violet, regain consciousness in the dark, cold, confused, your shawl gone. You stumble to your feet, see the real body of Lady Emmeline now beside you, the secateurs in her back, and you flee in terror back into the house, up the servants' staircase to your room, where you collapse in shock, your absence never noted in the chaos. You have no clear memory of the event, only a blur of fear and pain. And your own grey dress has garden gravel ground into its hem, which you cannot explain. Violet was crying silently, but they were tears of relief, of horrifying comprehension. It's like a nightmare I've been trying to remember. A shadow behind me, a smell of bay rum hair tonic. Every head turned to Whitchurch. He used bay rum. Poirot nodded. The timeline now becomes clear. The murder did not occur during Lady Emmeline's walk. It occurred before dinner. Whitchurch intercepted her, lured her to the rose walk on some pretext, perhaps to show her the tilted stone, and there he killed her. He hid the body in the nearby shrubbery. He then took the yellow orchid from its hiding place, placed it, and waited. After dinner, he set his tableau in motion, using the unsuspecting Miss Tempest as a temporary placeholder to secure the vital, immediate identification from the one man whose authority would be unquestioned, the doctor. Once the alarm was raised and everyone rushed down, he simply allowed the real body to be discovered in the same spot. The secateurs, his chosen weapon, were left in place. The orchid, his signature, was already there. He fixed Whitchurch with a pitiless stare. You removed the cream shawl from the unconscious Miss Tempest because it did not belong to Lady Emmeline and would raise questions. You likely discarded it later, perhaps burning it. But its absence from Lady Emmeline's person was the first loose thread. The second was the fibre. Poirot turned to Inspector Raglan, who had been summoned and now stood grim-faced by the door. The green fibre from Captain Lennox's jacket. It was, as I suspected, planted. But not to frame him initially. That was a fortunate bonus. It was placed on the balustrade after the murder, during the confusion, to suggest the killer had leaned there. But you, Whitchurch, had to be careful. You could not afford to have your own clothing shed fibers. So you wore something sleek, something that would not catch. A dark dressing gown over your evening clothes, perhaps? Slipped on and off in an instant, and you had the green fiber ready, taken from Lennox's brushed jacket earlier, to place as you discovered the body with the others. Whitchurch had sunk into himself a deflated, broken figure. The meticulousness of Poirot's reconstruction was its own damning confession. The motive? Dr. Pennington asked, aghast. The trust, Poirot said. A solicitor's dream and his prison. Whitchurch's firm would administer it for decades, drawing steady, significant fees. But Lady Emmeline was growing erratic. She might have changed her will. She might have dismissed him. She might even, under Dr. Pennington's care, have been declared incompetent, voiding the current will and creating a legal morass. The cleanest solution for Mr. Whitchurch was for Lady Emmeline to die while the current favourable will was in effect, and for the estate to pass smoothly into the trust he controlled. But the trust had a lifetime beneficiary, Miss Tempest. He could not kill her too without raising suspicion, so he devised a plan to make her appear unstable. The accidents terrorized Lady Emmeline, but they also made Violet look potentially negligent, or even malicious in her care. If Violet could later be quietly committed or discredited, the trust might eventually be dissolved in favor of the heir, Lennox, a man Whitchurch believed he could manipulate easily. It was a long-term strategy of total control over the Vane fortune. He looked at the shattered solicitor. You are a man of order, monsieur. You could not abide the unpredictable human element. So you decided to prune it. You are not a hot-blooded killer. You are a gardener of death. And you made one fatal mistake. You believed your own careful planting would be admired as evidence of an impossible artistic crime. But you forgot that the most beautiful garden often hides the most determined weed. And I, Hercule Poirot, am the weeder. He gave a sharp, definitive nod to Inspector Raglan. The case, Inspector, is now complete. The hidden clue was not an object present, but an object absent. The shawl that was not there. From that single omission, the whole artificial edifice crumbles. Whitchurch did not resist as the inspector stepped forward. He simply looked at Poirot with a kind of bleak professional respect. The duplicate key, he murmured. It's in a small brass box in the bottom of my Gladstone bag. You'll find the shawl ash in the grate of my room. It was over. The grand salon of Amberley Lodge, used only for the most formal occasions, was a room of chilly splendor. Gilt-framed portraits of stern Vanes looked down from damask-covered walls. The air smelled of beeswax and old, undisturbed wealth. It was here, on the morning following Whitchurch's confession, that Hercule Poirot chose to assemble the players of the tragedy one final time. He had requested the presence of everyone. Mrs. Elara Gresham, Dr. Alexander Pennington, Miss Violet Tempest, and even Captain Hugo Lennox, who had been released from custody, pale and subdued, his arrogance burned away by the terror of his close brush with the gallows. Inspector Raglan stood by the door, a solid, official presence. Poirot stood before the marble fireplace, himself a picture of neat perfection. He had arranged 5 chairs in a gentle arc facing him. It was not an inquisition, but a demonstration, a lecture in the science of deduction. Mesdames et messieurs, he began, his voice carrying clearly in the hushed room. I've asked you here to lay before you the complete sequence of events that led to the death of Lady Emmeline Vane. It is a story not of a sudden, passionate crime, but of a cold, cultivated evil grown in the shadow of these beautiful gardens. Please be seated. They sat, a disparate group bound by shared trauma. Violet, still fragile but with clearer eyes. Dr. Pennington, somber and professional. Mrs. Gresham, her face like weathered stone. Captain Lennox, avoiding everyone's gaze. "We begin not with the night of the murder, but 6 months ago," Poirot said, "with a series of petty, cruel accidents, a loosened stone, a sawn-through branch. Their purpose was twofold. Primarily, to prey upon Lady Emmeline's sensitive nature, to exacerbate her anxieties and make her dependent and suggestible. But secondarily, to cast a subtle shadow upon Miss Tempest. If a companion cannot keep her charge safe from accidents in her own garden, questions about her competence might arise. It was the first sowing of the poison." He glanced at Mrs. Gresham. "You, madame, were correct. It was a campaign of terror, and it was conducted by the one person who had the run of the estate, whose movements were never questioned, who could inspect a stone or a branch without arousing suspicion. The family solicitor, Mr. Felix Whitchurch." A low murmur rippled through the small audience. His motive was not the immediate, crude greed of an inheritance. It was the professional's desire for control, for order, and for a guaranteed, lucrative future. Lady Emmeline's will created a trust that his firm would administer for decades. Her growing instability threatened that perfect arrangement. She might change her will. She might be declared unsound. The trust, his masterpiece of legal planning, could unravel. Therefore, she had to die while the will was secure, and the trust had to proceed. But the trust benefited Miss Tempest for life. So, a second layer of the plan, to subtly discredit Miss Tempest, so that in time, perhaps, her benefit could be set aside. He turned to Dr. Pennington. "You, doctor, were an unwitting pawn. Your treatment of Lady Emmeline's nerves was entirely proper, but Whitchurch used your diagnoses to reinforce the narrative of a woman losing her grasp. He may even have hinted to you that Miss Tempest's care was lacking, deepening your concern." Pennington nodded slowly, a look of dawning horror on his face. "He did. He mentioned once that Violet seemed overwhelmed by Emmeline's fancies. Précisément. He was watering the seeds he had planted." Poirot resumed his pacing. "Now, we come to the night. The murder did not occur, as we all assumed, during Lady Emmeline's after-dinner walk. It occurred before dinner. Whitchurch lured her to the Rose Walk, perhaps to show her some new evidence of the garden's malice. There, he killed her with a single, powerful blow to the neck, breaking it. He then stabbed the body with the secateurs he had stolen earlier from Mrs. Gresham's shed, a brutal flourish to confuse the manner of death. He hid the body in the dense shrubbery of the adjacent border. Mrs. Gresham gave a sharp, pained intake of breath. He then placed the yellow orchid, which he had picked days before, using the duplicate key unknown to anyone, on the gravel. The stage was set, but he needed one more element, immediate, unquestioning identification of the body from a distance, to solidify the time of death after dinner. For that, he needed a stand-in. All eyes turned to Violet. She sat very straight, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "After dinner," Poirot continued gently, "when Lady Emmeline announced her intention to take air, Whitchurch saw his moment. He left the drawing-room briefly, perhaps to fetch a document, a plausible excuse. In the hall, he intercepted you, Mademoiselle Violet. He told you Lady Emmeline was feeling faint on the lower terrace and needed her shawl, or perhaps your shawl. Anxious to help, you fetched it and hurried out. He directed you to the Rose Walk. In the dim light, you saw a grey-clad form on the ground. You bent over it, and he struck you from behind, not to kill, but to stun." Violet's eyes were closed, reliving the blurred horror. "He then arranged your unconscious form on the gravel, draping your own cream shawl over you. From the terrace above, in the lamplight, the silhouette of a woman in grey with hints of silver at the hair was convincing." He returned to the drawing-room. When concern grew, he guided the doctor to the terrace. Dr. Pennington looked down, saw what he believed to be Lady Emmeline, and raised the alarm. In the ensuing rush downstairs, Whitchurch stayed with the group. In the confusion and darkness, he allowed the real body to be discovered. He had already placed the incriminating green fiber from Captain Lennox's jacket on the balustrade. In the shock, you, mademoiselle, regained consciousness, saw the horrific scene, and fled instinctively back to the house and your room. Your memory, a shattered puzzle. Poirot paused, letting the awful clarity of the scheme settle. The brilliance of it was its timing. The murder was committed with no one missing from the pre-dinner gathering. The alibi, for the apparent time of death, was created by a theatrical illusion, and the impossible orchid pointed to a magical, deranged killer, obscuring the painfully practical one. He turned to Captain Lennox. You, monsieur, were a convenient scapegoat. Your debts, your position as heir, your fiber, all made you the perfect candidate when the police sought a simple solution. Whitchurch's plan nearly succeeded twice over. He would have his controlled trust, and if you were hanged for the murder, the estate might pass even more quickly through the trust to whom? Perhaps in time to a rehabilitated or newly discovered heir, more pliable to the solicitor's advice. Lennox looked sick. The bastard, he whispered, but there was no heat in it, only a hollow awe at the machinations. His undoing, Poirot declared, was threefold. First, his own artistic vanity. The orchid was a flourish too many. It created a puzzle that demanded solution, attracting my attention. Second, the missing shawl. A small human detail his clinical mind overlooked. Lady Emmeline would have worn it. Its absence from the body was a silent scream that something was wrong. And third, his reaction to pressure. When I proposed that the orchid was picked in advance, he panicked. He knew the duplicate key could be traced to him, so he staged the attempt on his life to introduce the key as a revelation and to make himself a victim. But he could not stage it perfectly. The dust on his knees, the impression on his nightstand, the physics of the falling statue, they betrayed his hand. He was a planner, not an improviser. Poirot looked around the room, meeting each pair of eyes. So, you see, the murderer was not the one who feared the garden, nor the one who loved it too roughly, nor the one who stood to gain from it. It was the one who saw it merely as an asset, a portfolio of land and legal arrangements to be managed. He did not feel its beauty or its terror. He only calculated its yield, and in his calculation, a human life became a dispensable weed. He gave a final, slight bow. The logic is complete. The sequence is restored. The puzzle is solved. Are there any questions? The silence in the grand salon was profound, thick with the residue of shock and the chilling clarity of Poirot's narrative. He had not simply named a culprit. He had dissected an organism of malice, showing each diseased cell in the light. It was Mrs. Elara Gresham who broke the stillness. Her voice was low, rough with a grief that had finally found its proper target. The secateurs, my good Felcos. He used them not just to kill, but to insult everything. The garden, my friendship with Emmeline, the very act of cultivation. He turned a tool of care into one of butchery. Exactement, madame, Poirot said softly. It was a deliberate defilement, a final contemptuous twist of the blade. Captain Lennox passed a shaking hand over his face. And I was to be the fool who paid for it. The blundering heir. He must have been laughing at me every time I demanded the police do something. He saw you as a piece on the board, Captain, a knight to be sacrificed. Your predictable greed made you the perfect candidate. Dr. Pennington stood up, his physician's dignity reasserting itself over his mortification. And I was his unwitting instrument, his clock. My pronouncement of death fixed the time for everyone. He used my authority. He shook his head, a deep shame coloring his features. I should have examined her properly then and there. I let shock override my training. Do not reproach yourself too severely, Doctor, Poirot said. You were presented with a convincing illusion, engineered by a master of detail. Even the most rational mind can be deceived by a perfectly staged scene. Violet Tempest looked up, her eyes clear now, though shadowed. And I I was the puppet, the dummy in the window. He used my concern, my affection for her, to make me part of his display. A shudder ran through her. Will I ever remember it clearly? The memory may return in fragments, mademoiselle, or it may remain a merciful blur. The important thing is that you are free of the shadow. The guilt was never yours to bear. Inspector Raglan stepped forward from his post by the door. Whitchurch has made a full statement, corroborating every point of Monsieur Poirot's reconstruction. He's detailed the duplicate key, the staging of the accidents, the timing of the murder before dinner, the entire scheme. He seems almost relieved to have the architecture of his crime appreciated, even as it condemns him. Relief is common, Poirot mused. The mind that must conceal a complex truth strains under the burden. To have it aired, even in disgrace, is a kind of release. He will stand trial, of course. There's no doubt of the outcome, Raglan said grimly. The evidence is overwhelming, especially with his confession. He'll hang. The finality of the word hung in the opulent air. Justice, in its most severe form, would be delivered. The elegant, poisonous gardener would meet his end on the scaffold, a fate as stark and unadorned as his crime had been florid and complex. And the gardens? Mrs. Gresham asked abruptly, her practical nature surfacing through the gloom. What becomes of them now? All eyes turned to Violet Tempest, the lifetime beneficiary. She looked from Mrs. Gresham's fierce, possessive love for the land, to Captain Lennox's wary, calculating gaze, and finally to the portraits of the Vanes on the walls. They belong to the trust, she said quietly, but with a new firmness. And I belong to them for now. Mrs. Gresham, you have the right of supervision. I would like you to exercise it fully. Bring them back to health. Not as a memorial to fear, but as a place of peace again. That's what she would have wanted before the fear took hold. Mrs. Gresham gave a single, sharp nod, a lifetime of frustration and grief finding a purpose at last. I'll see to it. Captain Lennox cleared his throat. I'll be in London. The estate matters can be handled through the new trustees. He could not meet Violet's eye. The inheritance that had once seemed so urgent now felt tainted, distant. Perhaps in time he would find a better path, but for now he was simply glad to be free. Dr. Pennington offered to stay a few days to ensure everyone's health, particularly Violet's after the ordeal. It was a gesture of atonement, and it was accepted. The gathering dissolved, not with dramatic farewells, but with a slow, weary dispersal. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape altered, scarred, but cleansed. An hour later, Hercule Poirot stood on the upper terrace one final time. The morning sun sparkled on the dew-drenched roses below. The gardens of Amberley Lodge stretched out, breathtakingly beautiful, impossibly serene. The horror that had festered in their heart had been excised. Inspector Raglan joined him, handing him his hat and gloves. A masterful piece of work, Monsieur Poirot. I won't deny I had my doubts when you dismissed the fibre, but you saw the pattern we couldn't. The pattern is always there, Inspector, Poirot said, accepting his accessories with a nod of thanks. It is woven from the threads of human nature: vanity, greed, fear, love. One must only look at the weave, not be distracted by a single brightly colored strand. Will you return to London today? Oui. The city, with its beautiful, symmetrical squares, awaits. The English countryside is charming, but it has a profusion that is unsettling to the soul. Too many hiding places, too many shadows in the rose garden. He took a last, sweeping look at the vista. The tilted stone by the lotus pool would be fixed. The wisteria would be pruned with care. The yellow orchids would bloom behind their locked door, their key now a piece of evidence, their beauty no longer a prop for murder. It is a tragedy, of course, Poirot murmured, more to himself than to Raglan, but also a lesson. The most dangerous poison is not grown in a forgotten corner of the garden. It is cultivated in the orderly mind that believes it has the right to prune human life to suit its own design. He gave a final, precise flick to the points of his moustache, settled his hat upon his head, and turned his back on the glorious, treacherous landscape. "Come, Inspector," he said, his voice once more brisk and businesslike. "Let us depart. The little grey cells, they have weeded this particular plot most thoroughly. Now they require the stimulation of a good coffee and the contemplation of a perfectly symmetrical biscuit." And with that, Hercule Poirot, a small, immaculate figure of order, walked away from the house and the gardens, leaving the lingering ghosts of Amberley Lodge to the cleansing light of the sun and the slow, healing hands of time.